Good morning.
Good morning.
How was your breakfast this morning?
My breakfast was great.
Mine was consisted of a little coffee, and that's about it. So,
Well,
um,
that dovetails nicely into what we're going to be talking about today, which is protein intake and uh, is the RDA wrong in terms of weight loss, muscle building, and protein intake? You're listening to the Cheeky Clinic podcast. I'm Dr. Chris Delp.
and I'm Kat Parker Delp, owner of Duluth Med Spa.
If you've arrived at a point in life where good enough is simply just not good enough for you, you're in the right place.
Here we cover topics like sexual health and wellness, hormonal balance, and body optimization. And we deliver to you lessons from our travels from hard to get to places around the world.
We are so excited you're here to venture off the beaten path with us into the taboo where no subject is off limits.
Welcome to the Cheeky Clinic. Let's dive in. I say with breakfast, protein when I was growing up was just not a breakfast. I mean, I feel like my protein that I got, was brought up was my milk, and that was about it because we all had cereal. You know what I mean? Like everything was about your bowl of cereal in the morning. There was nothing in my upbringing that was protein related especially for the start of the day.
So tell me what your favorite breakfast cereal was.
Oh gosh, Fruit Loops, the horrible Fruit Loop. I mean, I can't believe I look back and think about what I ate as a child or I mean, that was just kind of like what we had for breakfast. My breakfast was a Pop-Tart or, a lot of cereal, but never protein. It was never a big part of my breakfast life.
So I would like to say that I had Lucky Charms, but I had older brothers, so there were no charms. They went through and ate every single one of them out of the entire box before I ever got a chance for it. That's one of the perks of having older brothers. Let's talk about a little bit about protein because there's crazy recommendations all over the board, and there's very specific difference in guidelines on what people need or want. But I think one of the first things, the people that are listening to this podcast are obviously very interested in their health and improving their health. And with that, we have to talk about some of the misconceptions about what we're going to be talking about today, and that's protein intake. One of the misconceptions, and I'm partially responsible for this because of the years that I train in medical school, is we talk about protein intake stressing the kidneys, or maybe even harming the kidneys with excessive amounts of protein. And does that actually happen?
That was drilled into us in nursing school as well. I feel like that the protein intake was huge, but that you had a little bit too much. If you had too much of it, it could damage your kidneys.
There was even a little checkbox for a renal diet. And so, if you do have any sort of chronic kidney disease, then that is the only time when your protein intake really does matter.
So diabetics, they need to
Yes.
be a little bit more careful.
Yes. And most people, when they go to their doctor, they'll have kidney function tests that are done. And if your kidney function tests are normal, measured both in a BUN and creatinine or GFR, glomerular filtration rate, if those are normal, then there is no reason to restrict protein. It does not harm your kidneys in any way, shape, or form. So with that, I think that's the first stepping stone when we're going to be talking about all of our proteins and weight loss and sarcopenia and all the things that impact our health and mortality. And again, a lot of this focus is going to be on women. Men tend to have greater protein consumption, and they don't suffer from muscle loss or sarcopenia as they age nearly as much. Some of that is protein intake, some of that is their endogenous testosterone. But I think that there's a revolution in terms of what we need in terms of protein. And you've changed your protein intake.
I have. I feel like, it was never really drilled into me too much when I was younger about protein intake, um, but I think it's so important, especially as menopausal women, and I currently go to a women's 50s over women over 50s, strength training class, with Anna McGee, and, we'll have her here someday, but she does talk it's not just about the strength training, but getting that protein intake in, and it's very hard for me, um, because I'm a natural faster. I naturally am not hungry until 2 p.m., and that's natural for me. I don't crave breakfast. I don't, have any desire to eat late at night or in the morning. So for me to get protein in, um, to try to get the amount of protein that I need in a daily allowance of what's right for me is very difficult. I can supplement in the morning, and Anna will ask, "What'd you have for breakfast? Do you have how much protein did you get?" And I'm like, over here, not much. But I do have to make a constant effort to add protein powders, at least to my coffee, unflavored or things like that. Otherwise, I'm a natural faster, so it's very difficult for me personally to get the amount that I need in, especially for strength training, and especially as a menopausal woman to keep that muscle up.
So that brings us up into just how do we know how much to get? We start with the recommended daily allowance, the RDAs. Those guidelines were developed by the government, and they had some research behind it. Now, the research behind how much protein you need, recommended daily allowance of protein is between 20 and 30% of your calories. That's what the government says. The RDAs. Now, first of all, that's a very wide range. And where did they come up with that?
Yeah, I was going to say, how do they come up with that number, and how long has that been the number?
What a great question. And this number goes way back when they're doing research. And one of the biggest research pools that the government has is the military. So what they're doing is they were seeing how much protein do you need to not have illness. And so that's really where the guidelines came from, is this is the amount you need or else you're going to get sick. So how is that relative to our lives? It's not. We don't want to just get enough to stave off illness. What we are, and over time, you look at our body's performance is increasing. People want to increase their performance, and so getting enough to stave off disease is clearly not the goal. So that's where those came from. They came from research studies, oftentimes based on military personnel, and that's where we got RDAs for a lot of things. How much vitamin C do you need to
Mhm,
stave off
mhm.
scurvy? How much vitamin? All of these things were guidelines that were based to stave off disease. These are not guidelines to enhance performance.
Good point. I feel like it's also important to note too, with all these GLP-1s on the market, making sure when the calories that you're getting in, that you have that protein, because there's so much talk about the muscle loss, and it's not due to the medication, it's due to someone not getting enough protein and not strength training and building muscle. So I think that the more you are strength training, the more protein your body is going to need to help recover.
Mhm.
Is that correct? To help
Yes.
recovery as well. Um, so how do you try to, what kind of things can we do to get that's a lot of protein. How much do you recommend that somebody should get in, an average person should get in versus somebody that's working out and trying to build muscle should get in?
So it's interesting. So you're talking about individualizing your protein intake, and there's some interesting extremes of that. And so the one extreme is the people that are trying to build, the athletes. You're working out 4 times a week, 5 times a week. You're trying to make some gains in terms of muscle. And the when you dive into those protein needs, it can be anywhere from 1.8 to 2.2 grams of protein per kilo, or about a gram per pound, which is a fairly large amount.
So that's like 130 grams a day for me, but in everything that you read about is your guideline, which is way lower than that. And I
Mhm.
feel like getting way lower amounts is not gonna it's not gonna help fuel your body. It's just not.
Nope.
Not if you're working out. It's not gonna
Mhm.
fuel you.
So, what about the sedentary people? What does the research say if you're sick? You've had knee surgery. You're laying around in bed. Do your protein requirements decrease? And the answer to that is clearly no. That's another place where you actually have to be getting pushing that much higher, because if you're not doing anything, if you're very sedentary, you're ill. First of all, with illness, your protein requirements increase. But to avoid the muscle loss when you're sedentary, you actually have to push those amounts higher, around that 2 grams per kilo. So just like an athlete, the protein requirements actually go up with that as well. So when you're individualizing it, yes, your activity level, your goals, but ultimately, no matter what your goals are, you want to avoid muscle loss. Sarcopenia is is something that increases your mortality as you age. Your bone loss follows muscle loss, and in the emergency department, we all have that talk with that patient that falls and breaks their hip, that their mortality just went up.
Mhm.
About a little over a third will get better and do fine. A third of them will struggle with ambulation, and your mortality, depending on your age, can be as high as a third just from falling and breaking your hip. So we talk about um, enhancing your performance, but also that's one of the things to kind of stave off disease.
Just to protect you, especially, as we say, especially menopausal women, to help them prevent that bone loss.
So
It fuels your brain too.
yes. So is there timing that is important for the protein loss? There's some pretty good research on that, on how to get the protein. And does Anna talk a little bit about that?
Well, I was gonna ask you, regarding protein, different types of protein. Is there some, are animal proteins way better for you?
Uh,
I mean, does that make any difference in the types of protein you get and how it affects your body and your muscle?
so that goes back to what's in protein, and protein are just uh, amino acids put
Okay.
together. And there's amino acids that we can make, and then there's amino acids that we can't make. And those amino acids that we can't make are called essential amino acids, which are things that you've got to have in order to make protein, and you have to get it from another source. We're great at building our own protein, but there are things that we need from external sources to get that. And so some of these essential amino acids, all of the essential amino acids, you can find in meat and animal protein. When you're talking plant-based protein, you've got to spend a lot more time getting the proper amounts. The one that I'm thinking of is leucine, one of the essential amino acids. Can be found in plants, but in very small amounts. If you're talking meats, you can find animal protein. You can find that much easier, much larger amounts, and it makes it much easier to do this. So there's clearly some health benefits from vegetarian and vegan diets, but there's also some serious
Mhm.
challenges when you are vegan or vegetarian in order to get a balanced protein. And that functions so much not only in preventing sarcopenia, but also for weight loss. When you are are working out, and trying to lose weight, people say, well, you should reduce your calorie intake. And there's a lot of evidence that shows that that's not true, especially if you're cutting out protein from your
Mhm.
diet.
Mhm.
Um, so are you making a lot of efforts to how much effort are you making to make sure you get enough?
Yeah, if I know I'm not gonna get it in the morning, I'll drink a protein shake. I'll supplement. But then I just try to make good choices in the afternoon. Um, but yeah, if I know I'm not gonna get it all in, then I do try to supplement it. I just don't I mean, I don't know how I would ever if as a vegetarian, there's no way that I would get 100, grams of protein a day. I just don't think that that would be I think that would be horribly difficult, I think.
Yeah, you would starve because you don't cook. and
I
and I
would
don't
starve, and I do
yeah
not cook. You're
yeah
correct.
and I cook the meat. So yeah,
You cook all of the things.
would you would waste away. Um, so um, one of the benefits of that vegetarian diet is people do tend to get a lean, but when they start to lose their muscle mass, then your body goes through a lot of complex metabolic pathways, and you start to really make more body fat. If you're running at a calorie deficit, especially a protein deficit, there's a lot of personal trainers out there that when they're working with people to lose their weight, will we have this mindset of, oh, I've got to reduce my calories. And that's not true. A lot of the personal trainers will look at your diet and say, no, you actually need to eat a lot more.
Mhm. Mm.
And making sure that you're getting, if you are doing your workout, there is some interesting data that says within 2 hours of your workout, if you can get a 30-gram load of protein,
Does
that
it matter if it's before or after, or should it specifically be after?
the most recent study, fairly large study, was as after.
Okay.
The the You're using calories. You're breaking down your fats during your workout, and the largest study to date was the one that I was reviewing. It was afterwards. They also talked about how if you are wanting to lose weight, you shouldn't be getting your protein small amounts frequently. They should be in a full large meal form, like 30 to 40 grams of protein at
Per
a time.
per meal,
Yep.
so just
Um,
pack that in on each meal.
and when you think about it, it makes sense. If you are wanting to drop your body fat, but you're constantly snacking, then your body doesn't have any real need to go for the harder body fat when you're constantly supplying it.
Yeah.
So if your body, it's much easier to reach for the snack that you've just given it rather than to reach down into the fat stores and drop those stores. So that timing of the protein is important. So eating a fairly large amount at a time, three, maybe four times a day, is actually makes a difference. Now, larger studies will certainly show that that the timing, although it's important, isn't as important as the total amount of protein that you're getting. So if you don't get that 30-gram protein bolus 2 hours after you work, don't worry about it. Just make sure that you're getting, that's around two grams per kilo or a gram per pound for those people that are working out on a regular basis or people that are laid up, ill and sedentary.
Is there a point that your body is there a point that you if you a point of amount of protein that you, don't get that you would actually start wasting muscle, that you would lose muscle? Is there a point, like if you're getting less than a certain amount that you are no matter what you're doing, your body is gonna lose muscle? Because I think that's important for my brain because I know I'm trying to build muscle and to know what my point is to make sure that I have that I meet that point so that
Mhm.
I'm not losing for certain. What is that something that is,
Absolutely.
studied?
The NIH has come up with a lot of different studies looking specifically at this problem. Again, a lot of times targeting women because they're the biggest losers when it comes to muscle loss. So any day that you get under 50 grams of protein is a day that you are losing muscle. Your your muscle is a great source for your body's energy stores. You can break muscle down and use that as an energy source fairly easily, and your body needs a certain amount of energy. If you're not getting it, it's breaking it down.
And I feel like that's a really important note to make for, especially with the back to the GLP-1 subject, because there's so many people on that the high doses of those medications are really going to just cut your appetite. I mean, it will cut your appetite, and so there's been a lot of talk about like, oh, well, the GLP-1s are going to cause you to lose muscle. They don't eat your muscle. Your GLP-1s are not causing you to lose muscle, but high doses of that are gonna cause you to have 0 appetite, and therefore, you're not gonna get the protein needed to maintain what you have or to build what you have. Is that, how you see that?
So you're talking about the Instagram phenomena of Ozempic butt,
Right, right.
which that is definitely a thing. Ozempic butt, muscle loss, measuring muscle density, lean muscle density around people's legs. When you look at people on GLP-1s, then there's significant muscle loss associated with GLP-1s, unless you take a subset analysis of the people that are working on their protein intake. And if you look at that subset analysis of people on GLP-1s that are getting the targeted amount of protein, and we're talking that 1.5 to 2 grams of protein per kilo, then those people don't have that associated muscle loss.
And it's
Um,
hard to do when you're not hungry.
yep.
You know, I mean, you're if you're on those high doses, that's why I feel like there's a better way to try to look at GLP-1 dosing and microdosing and doing dosing that is not the standard dosing for some people that want the health benefits of it. But that fear-based of GLP-1s are gonna cause you to lose muscle, and that's just not the case. I think it's the lack of intake and the lack of protein, and the lack of strength training that's gonna cause you to lose muscle.
And that's the other thing, resistance training. Resistance training in women, along with protein supplementation, you have to throw in some resistance training in there to maintain bone density as well as to maintain muscle. There's very clear data on that. So. When we're talking about the best way to lose weight, that it has to involve monitoring your protein intake, and the best way to maintain your muscle mass. Again, it's becoming very, very clear that we go through these cycles. We went through a cycle where fat was bad.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody knew fat was bad. And then it was like, well, carbohydrates are bad. And well, all of this evolution is fine tuning what our bodies really need. There's lots of external forces there. I mean, the people, there's a profit that's being made on your Lucky
Absolutely.
Charms for your
Yep.
breakfast.
Right,
Uh,
right. I
uh,
mean, we grew up with that. The cereal aisle was a huge thing as a kid for me. You know, you got to pick out your box of cereal, and it's just to look back on that and to not have that good nutrition in the morning. I think there's changes coming about of that as far as like diet and the breakfast in the morning and
So this is
what you put in
just
your
the
mouth.
latest evolution in what you need to do to lead a healthier, longer life. We all know that what you put in your body is important. The guidance for protein, if if you're just looking at RDAs, there's such a wide range from 10 to 30% of your calories need to be. It should be more 30% or higher. There's no reason not to, and there's some very compelling reasons to do that. Your protein intake, you have, is there?
It's hard for me.
Yeah, but what do you use?
Oh gosh, I use I think it's called Isopure, I think is the name of it. If I wanna grab and go, I'll have a bottle of that because I think there's, like, 32 grams of protein in that, and I tend to, grab one of those in the morning and force myself to try to get a little protein in then, but it's hard for me when I don't have any,
And there's a protein powder,
there's
isopure protein
there's a
powder that
protein powder.
you can add to eggs to add that. Because I
Yep,
mean, when you
it's
talk about,
doesn't have any flavor, you can add it to spaghetti sauce just to get that extra, protein in. So but I do have to make a conscious effort to do it.
yeah, absolutely. So to try to get that amount, if you are vegan or vegetarian, make sure that you are making sure you get some supplements to make sure that you're getting all the essential amino acids so that you don't have muscle loss associated with that. There's a great guidance out there in terms of common protein for foods. Like eggs, it's 7 grams of protein for an egg. So when you're talking your needs of getting 130 grams, I mean,
You have to eat over a dozen eggs.
yes, you would. So you have to pay attention to that, or how you're going to get that protein, and track that on a regular basis.
Yeah.
Um, but that's part of an athlete. It's part of aging that you have to pay attention to, and it's something that has clearly been underrated. I see it in the emergency department all the time with a number of hip fractures, and then people are laying around, they're debilitated, and nobody's giving them extra protein. There's no specific healing diet that the hospital will prescribe that's high in protein, and that is despite very clear data that when you are healing and when you are sedentary and infirm, your protein intakes can approach that of what an athlete might need.
Wow, interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, say we go get some lunch and get some protein.
Yeah.
It is my time to eat now.
All right. Well, thanks for listening to us. I think that it's a great time for you to reevaluate your own protein intake to make sure that you can maintain yourself in the highest function that you possibly can.
Thanks for joining us on a cheeky adventure through the world of wellness. Follow our spicy tips, laugh out loud stories, and expert advice designed to keep you feeling youthful, vibrant, and always in the loop.
Follow the show so you don't miss a beat. Stay connected and let's keep the fun going.
And if there's a subject that you'd like to hear more about, please let us know. You can connect with us by clicking the contact link below or send us a message on social media.
Make sure to send this episode to a friend who could benefit from today's topics. And don't forget to leave the show a 5-star review.
Thanks for listening to The Cheeky Clinic. We'll see you in the next one.